Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of compelling sources and, together, pull out the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge.
Our goal is to help you cut through the noise and get truly well-informed on complex topics.
Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a subject that immediately brings up, well, a lot of questions, strong opinions, and often some pretty uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, the world of mail-order brides.
Exactly.
It's a topic that, for many people, it conjures up these immediate images of vulnerability, maybe even outright exploitation.
Right.
But our deep dive today is designed to challenge those initial assumptions, forcing us and you to confront a profound and provocative duality.
Which is?
Is the mail-order bride industry primarily a pathway to genuine opportunity for some women, or is it fundamentally a system built on and perpetuating oppression?
It's a huge question.
It really is, and it's one that defies simple answers. It demands a really nuanced exploration.
Absolutely. We're going to peel back the layers to understand what truly drives this global industry, which has grown, just exponentially with the advent of technology.
And crucially, we're going to explore the deeply personal stories that exist within it, because it's not just statistics, is it?
Not at all. Our primary source for this deep dive is a compelling paper by Amber M. Wilk titled Oppression or Opportunity: The Selling of Mail-Order Brides.
And what makes this research particularly unique and impactful and really brings a human anchor to our discussion is that it was directly inspired by Wilk's own aunt's experience.
Her own aunt.
Her own aunt was a mail-order bride, so this gives us such an intimate and empathetic lens through which to view this often misunderstood topic.
Wow, okay, so our mission today
Is to extract the most important insights from Wilk's research, understand the various perspectives at play because there are different perspectives, and uncover some surprising facts.
facts that will truly help you become well-informed about what has become this continuously growing, multi-billion-dollar international industry.
We'll explore the complex, often harsh factors that encourage women to leave their homes in the first place,
The realities they face when they arrive in a new country.
and the profound ethical questions that this entire phenomenon inevitably raises about things like consent, agency, and exploitation.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When many of us hear the term mail-order bride, certain images or assumptions immediately come to mind, right? Maybe from old movies or news headlines.
Definitely.
But beyond those initial impressions, what's truly at the heart of this phenomenon, especially like now in its modern iteration?
What's truly fascinating here is that while the phrase itself might sound somewhat old-fashioned, almost like something out of the 19th century,
Right, it does.
the international trafficking aspect of mail-order brides isn't actually a new phenomenon at all. It's been around.
Okay.
However, as you alluded to, the advent of global technology, specifically the internet, has caused this capitalistic industry to absolutely explode, just boom, in scale and reach.
So it's always been there, but technology just amplified it massively.
Precisely. And it forces us to confront this very real tension between what might genuinely look like a liberating opportunity for some individuals,
Like a real choice they make.
a real choice, a chance for a better life, perhaps, and then, for others, clear, undeniable elements of exploitation.
Okay.
And that tension, that inherent duality, is really what we're going to explore throughout this entire deep dive.
And it seems like it begins with understanding the incredibly harsh realities that often push women into even considering this path in the first place.
Yes.
The source material highlights a very specific targeting of vulnerability. It's not just, a general search for women.
No, not at all. Marriage brokers specifically target women from economically underprivileged backgrounds, often in developing countries.
We're talking about situations where the choices are profoundly limited.
Profoundly. Wilk's paper, drawing on earlier research, points out that women in these situations often face truly dire, heartbreaking choices for work.
Like what kind of choices?
Imagine being in a position where your options are stark. Becoming a migrant worker, which has its own dangers,
Sure.
potentially falling into prostitution, or seeking a future as a mail-order bride.
Wow. So those are the options.
That's often the reality presented. This immediately sets an incredibly high-stakes context for their decision-making process.
So for many, this isn't simply about finding a romantic partner. It's presented as more of a lifeline.
Exactly, a potential lifeline, a solution to profound economic and social precarity, a desperate way out of circumstances that offer little to no other paths for upward mobility or even just basic survival.
They are, in essence, choosing what they perceive to be the least worst option in a world of limited, challenging choices.
That's a good way to put it. The least worst option.
And the way these prospective brides are then marketed to men, it's quite specific, isn't it? Focusing on what's called hegemonic femininity.
Yes, that's a core concept here.
Can you unpack that a bit? Hegemonic femininity?
Sure, it's essentially a social construction, a prescribed ideal,
Right.
where women are depicted as maintaining the traditional hierarchy of gender.
Meaning?
Meaning it reinforces the belief that men are inherently dominant and women are, by nature, sort of subservient.
Okay.
This marketing strategy inherently creates a significant power imbalance, almost promising men full control in the relationship.
And this particular portrayal, it appeals directly to men who are specifically seeking a particular type of relationship.
That's the idea. One where they anticipate a highly compliant, subordinate, and traditionally feminine partner who will fit neatly into predetermined gender roles. Not necessarily an equal partner.
Which naturally leads us to the expectations men often bring into these relationships and, well, the hidden dangers that come with them.
Absolutely. Men are frequently led to believe, through this marketing, that these women are inherently family-oriented.
Right.
Entirely uninterested in pursuing education or working outside the home.
And crucially, that they don't believe in divorce. Like, they'll stick around no matter what.
Exactly. And this creates what one researcher termed heteronormative patriarchal entitlement.
That sounds like a mouthful. What does it mean?
It's essentially the deeply ingrained, often unconscious belief that men are inherently owed a certain type of compliant traditional partner based on these perceived gender roles.
Okay, I see. Like an entitlement.
Yes. And this mindset can, unfortunately, attract abusive and potentially very dangerous men.
Especially dangerous for women who might step outside of that narrow box.
Precisely. If a woman wants independence or education or just personal growth, anything that deviates from that incredibly narrow prescribed gender role, the risk increases.
And what's critical for you, the listener, to grasp is that the potential brides themselves, they're often not even aware of the risks.
They're often not always cognizant of domestic violence risks before they arrive. They might not know what it looks like or that it's even a possibility in their specific situation.
So this lack of awareness just amplifies their vulnerability significantly.
Hugely. They step into these situations with little understanding of the legal or social safety nets available to them in a new country.
And once they do arrive, the immediate challenges are immense, often overwhelming.
Oh, definitely. Imagine the profound isolation. New brides often experience this upon entering a country like the United States, suddenly immersed in an entirely unknown culture.
And a foreign language they may not speak at all.
Right. The cultural and linguistic shock can be incredibly disorienting.
And they're immediately at a critical disadvantage legally, too.
Yes, because they often have little to no knowledge of the deportation or domestic violence laws specific to their new home.
They would know their rights.
Exactly. This absence of legal knowledge, combined with deep cultural unfamiliarity, places them in extreme danger. Think about it. If their husband is the source of their need for help.
Who do they turn to?
Precisely. They may literally have no one else, no friends, no family, no community support, and no understanding of their legal rights or how to access help.
It reinforces their isolation and vulnerability to an extreme degree.
It does. And while it's really important to acknowledge that some mail-order brides do find themselves in healthy, loving, positive situations, and we will hear one such story later.
We should keep that in mind.
We absolutely should. But the harsh reality, consistently found in the research, is that many find themselves being physically or mentally abused. The outcomes exist on a very wide spectrum, but the risks are undeniably high.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Shifting to that personal connection you mentioned earlier. The paper we're exploring was inspired by the author's own aunt.
Yes, Amber Wilk's aunt.
This brings such a deeply human element to what can often feel like just abstract data or academic analysis.
It really does.
The author, Wilk, grew up entirely unaware her aunt was a mail-order bride. She only realized it much later in life.
Which must have been quite a shock.
I imagine so. And what's powerful here is that Wilk approached her research with a critical and self-aware eye. She acknowledged her own privilege and Western views and even her biases towards her uncle.
That's so important. She understood she was an outsider looking in, trying to reconcile her lived experience with this phenomenon she suddenly saw from a new, much more complex angle.
This self-awareness is crucial for genuine insight, isn't it?
Absolutely. The author explains that her uncle was a Navy veteran, and for a period he was stationed in the Philippines.
Okay.
While there, he observed cultural values that, according to some research, placed Filipino women in a traditionally submissive role, often as selfless caretakers of the home and children.
In the context of the U.S. military presence there, that played a role too.
It potentially did. What's particularly relevant here is that the significant presence of the American military in the Philippines during that era could, and often did, sort of, glamorize U.S. life.
Make it seem appealing.
Very appealing. And disturbingly, it could also reinforce ideas of white dominance over Southeast Asian women.
So this historical and cultural context potentially influenced her uncle's desire for a Filipina bride. He was looking for someone who fit those perceived cultural values.
It seems likely. It raises the question, was he looking for an equal partner? Or was he looking for someone to fill a specific kind of prescribed role within the relationship based on those observations?
That sets the stage for a really fascinating and, looking back, ethically complex personal anecdote the author shares. The babysitting revelation.
Yes, this part is quite striking.
The author, as a young single mother herself, was struggling financially. She paid her aunt $75 for 50 hours of babysitting a week.
50 hours for $75.
Yeah, and just for context, local daycare rates at the time were around $250 for the same amount of care.
A huge difference.
Massive.
And here's where the perspectives just diverge so starkly, highlighting the vast economic disparities at play. From the aunt's view,
How did she see it?
that $75 was a generous amount. She genuinely saw it as an opportunity to make money that she literally had never had before in her life.
It's an opportunity, really.
That's how she perceived it. What's more, that money was specifically intended to allow her to visit her daughter in Florida, whom she hadn't seen in years.
So for her, this was a tangible benefit, a path to reconnection, a sign of economic betterment, even at that rate.
Exactly. It meant something significant to her beyond the dollar amount.
But the author's realization, looking back on that situation years later, quite different
Yeah.
and deeply unsettling for her.
Yes. She now acknowledges that despite her good intentions and her own difficult situation, her own means of survival, making minimum wage.
She felt she was exploiting her aunt.
She uses that word. She felt she was, in fact, unintentionally exploiting her aunt as cheap labor.
Wow. This raises an incredibly important and complex ethical question for us and for you, the listener.
It really does.
How do profound economic disparities and ingrained cultural expectations deeply shape what one person perceives as a generous opportunity and another, upon reflection, sees as exploitation?
Where's that line? And who gets to draw it, especially when one party has significantly less power or fewer options? It's a real ethical knot.
It really is. And the living conditions and marital dynamics the author witnessed, they further illuminate this complexity of perception.
They do. Despite the uncle not being financially poor, the aunt and uncle lived in a small house in a high-poverty, high-crime inner-city neighborhood in Rochester, NY.
Okay. And the house itself?
It was set up almost exclusively for the uncle's comfort and needs. There was only one vehicle, and the aunt, without a driver's license,
Was basically stuck at home without him.
essentially housebound.
Yeah.
The living room was dominated by the uncle's oversized couch, complete with a built-in cooler for his sodas, leaving minimal space for anything else.
A cooler in the couch.
Apparently. His closet had been turned into a pantry and her minimal personal belongings. They were relegated to a small dresser in the hallway, not even in a proper bedroom space.
Just in the hallway.
In the hallway.
The author also witnessed firsthand her uncle's routine cruelty.
Yes, she recalls him yelling at her aunt for minor things.
And there was that chilling moment with the garbage bag.
Right. She recounted seeing her aunt, who was barely 5 feet tall, struggling to carry a heavy garbage bag out to the curb.
And the uncle.
He walked up, handed her another heavy bag, and simply said, "Don't forget this." Didn't offer to help, just added to her burden.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the imbalance, the lack of care.
It really does. And despite this blatant display of cruelty and seemingly difficult, if not outright demeaning living conditions,
The aunt just took the bag.
she kindly took the additional bag and walked outside, appearing, in the author's words, unbothered.
Unbothered. That's hard to wrap your head around.
It is, and that reaction really drives home the profound cultural and contextual differences at play. It suggests maybe a deep internalization of sacrifice, a cultural emphasis on duty, or perhaps simply a pragmatic acceptance of her situation as still preferable to her past.
So we have to ask, what does unbothered truly mean in a context where options are so limited and cultural norms are so deeply ingrained? Was it acceptance, resignation, or just a complex form of coping?
We can't know for sure, but it raises those questions.
So what does this all mean when we piece together the aunt's perspective, the core insight she shared with the author?
Was that her life in the United States had been great compared to her life in the Philippines.
Great, even with all that.
Compared to what she left behind, yes. Her cultural view, reinforced from childhood, emphasized sacrificing her individual needs for the well-being of her family.
And there was this implication that her uncle had saved her.
A strong implication, yes. Saved her from the poor conditions she experienced in the Philippines.
So the author herself was left wrestling with this profound question. How truly horrible must her aunt's life in the Philippines have been?
For her new reality, with all its challenges and indignities, to be considered glorious and a source of comfort.
It leaves that unanswered question that we'll keep coming back to throughout this deep dive. Did being able to leave the Philippines as a mail-order bride, despite the circumstances, make her feel truly empowered? Or was it something else?
A fundamental question. And sadly, the story of the author's aunt concludes with a disturbing, repeating cycle that really underscores the dehumanizing potential of this industry.
What happened?
The aunt eventually passed away from cancer.
Oh, no.
And in less than a year, the uncle ordered a new bride from the Philippines.
He just repeated the whole process.
Repeated the entire process, almost as if replacing a possession, not mourning a partner.
That's incredibly bleak.
It is. And the author herself, deeply impacted by witnessing her late aunt's mistreatment and her uncle's continued negative remarks about her even after her death, she no longer speaks to him.
Understandable.
This personal experience highlights the truly dehumanizing aspect of treating another human being as an object that could simply be bought and owned, rather than a partner with agency and dignity.
It's a stark reminder of the potential for commodification. And that brings us to the broader mechanics of this global industry, which operates on just a vast scale.
Immense scale.
At its core, a mail-order bride is defined as a woman who lists herself on a website with the explicit intent to move and marry a man from a different country.
Using a marriage broker to facilitate that often complex process.
So from the perspective of opportunity, why do women choose this?
Well, women often genuinely choose this path because for them, it can be their only chance at class mobility. Literally their only perceived way up.
Or just a way to escape poverty?
Or an only means to escape a poverty-stricken nation, as some research puts it. In this very specific sense, you could view it as empowering, as these women are taking active charge of their futures in incredibly difficult and restrictive circumstances.
But then there's the flip side. The oppression perspective.
Exactly. From that perspective, these marriage brokers actively and strategically seek out women in developing countries, specifically capitalizing on their economic inequality.
And then they market them to men in wealthier countries.
Precisely. Marketing them to men in economically advanced countries like the United States. It's a highly refined business model built on global disparity.
Which leads directly to the ongoing, often heated debate around human trafficking.
Yes. The process, as some researchers have stated, can indeed be viewed as openly trafficking women to men.
And human trafficking, just to be clear, involves exploitation for profit, recruitment, transport, purchase, sale.
All those elements. Exploitation of a vulnerable human being for profit or personal gain.
But here's the crucial and, frankly, rather disturbing loophole in U.S. law.
Yes, this is important. American human trafficking law often doesn't apply to mail-order brides.
Why not? It seems like it fits the description.
Because the women, or sometimes their families, give some form of consent, even if that consent is acquired by deception or under duress due to extreme economic vulnerability.
So the argument is they chose to participate, even if the choice was based on lies or desperation.
That's often the legal sticking point. Once in their new lives, these women might realize they were trafficked by deception. Maybe the man lied about his finances, his intentions, his criminal history.
Things they couldn't possibly verify from afar.
Exactly. They lack the resources, the language skills, the knowledge of legal recourse to check anything their potential husbands told them before moving.
So they're effectively trapped in situations that might be highly exploitative, but fall outside that narrow legal definition of trafficking.
It leaves them incredibly vulnerable, legally speaking.
And make no mistake, this isn't some small niche market. This is a truly massive business.
Massive. We're talking about a capitalistic-driven $2 billion international industry. And that figure is likely much higher now.
$2 billion.
Wow. The scale is quite astounding, revealing just how deeply entrenched the system is. There are an estimated 2,700 mail-order bride agencies worldwide.
How many in the U.S.?
About 500 of them operating just in the United States. And this industry isn't shrinking.
It's growing.
It saw a significant 29% increase just between 2012 and 2013 alone, according to one report. We're talking about approximately 10,000 mail-order bride marriages occurring in the U.S. annually.
10,000 a year. That indicates a very high and sustained demand from men seeking partners this way.
It does. And it's also worth noting, though our primary source focuses mainly on heterosexual dynamics, that the industry has adapted. It's expanded to include mail-order grooms and even same-sex marriages.
Really? Mail-order grooms, too?
Yes. It highlights its adaptability and the evolving nature of, well, human connection and commerce. It suggests the underlying drivers, economic disparity, cultural expectations, the search for partnership, aren't confined to one gender or orientation.
Interesting. So where are these women primarily coming from?
Most brides are sourced from regions like Russia, Eastern Europe, various parts of Asia, and Central America.
And the Philippines is still the largest supplier.
Consistently cited as the largest supplier, yes. And these services, they are certainly not cheap for the men purchasing them.
What kind of costs are we talking?
Companies charge an average of $6,000 to $10,000 per bride. Sometimes prices go up to $15,000 or even more.
$6,000 to $10,000. But here's the critical, often overlooked detail that truly underscores the commodification. The mail-order bride herself receives no money from this exchange. None of that substantial fee goes to her directly.
That's right. That absence of financial benefit for the women themselves really underscores the commodity aspect.
And this concept of a catalog, whether it was physical back in the day or digital now, it further dehumanizes the process, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Women are required to provide marriage brokers with extensive personal information details like their weight, measurements, interests, numerous photographs.
All to create these profiles designed to capture the attention of potential suitors.
And then prospective husbands essentially flip through digital pictures and pick out the women they want as if they are ordering out of an electronic department store catalog.
Like shopping online.
Pretty much. This superficial marketing undeniably treats women like a commodity, like an item on a shopping list. It can allow men to feel entitled to own the women they purchase.
It explicitly sells feminine sexuality for profit, with men choosing based primarily on external features and often deeply ingrained sexual fantasies rather than personality or genuine connection.
It's a transaction based on perceived ownership and superficial qualities. A stark objectification.
But to play devil's advocate for a moment, is there any way this could be seen differently by the women?
It's complex. It's also worth considering that from some women's perspectives, and this is where that duality really manifests, the idea of being chosen based on their looks or a curated profile could potentially be seen as empowering or confidence boosting.
How so?
Especially if their physical appearance is perceived as their most valuable asset in a world with limited options. It might offer a sense of desirability and a tangible pathway out of their current circumstances.
So it highlights the complex, often conflicting perceptions at play within this industry. What one sees as objectification, another might see as validation or opportunity.
Precisely. It depends entirely on context and individual perspective.
And technology has just exploded this whole phenomenon beyond anything previously imaginable.
Completely transformed it.
Before the internet, bride profiles were literally compiled in physical catalogs that men would flip through.
Right. Now they're on vast, easily accessible websites. You know the names: loveme.com, fantasybrides.com, anastasiadate.com, rosebrides.com, and many others.
The internet has made it incredibly more visible and productive, speeding up communication dramatically and increasing its global reach.
Massively. For instance, just one site, anastasiadate.com, averages something like 2.6 million visits per month.
2.6 million a month.
Yeah. And you've probably seen the ads yourself, maybe in your social media feed or as pop-ups, with captions like, "Come pick up the lady you deserve."
Ugh, yeah, the lady you deserve.
This digital omnipresence fuels the demand by making these women readily available and portraying the process as a simple consumer choice. Men can browse potential partners from home, women can be viewed by millions globally. It both accelerates the process and amplifies its scale enormously.
Okay, so once a woman is chosen, the couple typically corresponds via mail or email, often through translators, right, because of language barriers.
Almost always, yes. Language barriers are nearly universal. But there's a serious ethical issue with these translators sometimes.
What's the issue?
Research points out that translators sometimes eroticize the conversation or objectify the women to make them seem more alluring, more sexually eager.
They manipulate the communication.
Essentially, yes. To close a deal, perhaps, rather than facilitate genuine connection, it's deeply problematic, fundamentally distorting the interactions.
So once a connection seems to be made, what's next?
The agency then often arranges a week-long romance tour. The man travels to meet his potential bride face-to-face in her home country.
A romance tour.
Sounds innocent, but this step is actually a crucial prerequisite for U.S. immigration law, specifically for the K-1 fiancé visa. You generally have to prove you've met in person.
Ah, okay. So it's a legal requirement disguised as romance.
Largely, yes. If the couple decides to marry after this meeting, the agency applies for this K-1 visa.
And that allows the woman to enter the U.S. for how long?
For a strict 90-day period, specifically for the marriage ceremony to take place.
90 days. That's incredibly brief.
It is, and it severely limits how well couples can truly get to know each other, especially under that kind of pressure. It sets them up for potential future issues, misunderstandings, and even abuse, as the woman is often completely dependent on the man for her legal status during that time and beyond.
Now, despite the largely unregulated nature of much of this global industry, the United States has attempted to put some regulations in place. You mentioned IMBRA earlier.
Yes, the International Marriage Broker Regulation Act, passed in 2005.
What does it do?
It requires marriage brokers to conduct background checks on the American men wishing to purchase a bride, including financial info, criminal records, details about previous marriages, children.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
It also mandates that agencies provide foreign brides with informational pamphlets about domestic violence resources and their legal rights in the U.S.
So giving them some information at least.
Some information, yes. But while IMBRA was certainly a step towards protection, it has significant, often criticized limitations.
Such as?
Well, one major point is that the husband still sponsors the bride's citizenship over a period of time. This gives the man significant control and leverage over the woman, especially if she wants to stay in the country.
So if she leaves an abusive situation before getting permanent residency, she risks deportation.
That's a huge fear, yes. And critics argue that the law, despite its good intentions, tends to criminalize the mail-order brides more than protect them from abusive relationships and exploitation.
How does it criminalize them?
For example, by placing the burden on the women to understand and utilize the information in the pamphlets, often in a foreign language, without support, under immense pressure, rather than focusing more on preventing problematic men or brokers in the first place. It essentially puts the onus on the potential victim to protect herself in a system stacked against her.
This broader lack of effective global regulation, it has truly serious real-world consequences.
Absolutely. Proponents against state intervention often argue, there is no justification for state intervention that infringes on personal freedom and individuals' rights to privacy, even when it comes to marriage contracts.
But the reality on the ground seems different.
The real-world outcomes tell a much darker, far more common story. Many brides become victims of fraud, find themselves in fake marriages purely for immigration purposes, are forced into prostitution, endure loveless marriages, or become trapped in oppressive labor conditions.
As Dorchen Leithold from the Center for Battered Women's Legal Services starkly put it.
The happy stories are the exception.
That's a sobering statement.
It is, and this is a critical point that needs emphasis. While that sobering reality exists, there's one surprising statistic that often catches people off guard, and it's very important for a well-informed discussion.
That's that.
Mail-order marriages actually have a lower divorce rate, around 20%, than the American average, which hovers closer to 50%.
Lower. 20% versus 50. That is surprising. Does that mean the marriages are healthier?
Not necessarily, and that's the crucial caveat. This statistic, while seemingly positive on the surface, doesn't automatically negate the narratives of abuse or imply healthier marriages. In fact, it often masks a darker truth.
How so? Why might the rate be lower if abuse is prevalent?
Well, think about the immense barriers these women face in leaving any marriage, let alone an abusive one. A profound lack of financial independence, the constant fear of deportation, cultural shame, family pressure, or simply having absolutely nowhere else to go and no support system.
So a marriage that lasts isn't automatically a healthy or consensual one. Staying could be the only option, not a choice.
Exactly. In fact, data supports this. Over half of 175 U.S. legal aid groups surveyed by the Tahiri Justice Center explicitly reported having clients who had been abused by husbands they met through marriage brokers.
Over half. That clearly shows that even if the marriage lasts on paper, it doesn't mean it's healthy or safe.
Yeah.
The source material argues that lawmakers are, in essence, ignoring the open trafficking of women that occurs through these services, often under the guise of consensual relationships.
There's a strong call for more comprehensive laws to protect these women. But there's a crucial caveat.
Which is?
Lawmakers must be careful not to push the industry entirely underground.
Because that would remove even the limited protections that exist now.
Exactly. It would make it even harder to monitor the industry and assist victims. It's a very delicate balance between effective intervention and potentially causing unintended negative consequences.
So we have this tension between the need for regulation and the risk of driving the problem further into the shadows.
Yes. And this deep dive would be incomplete without delving into individual stories. We've got two powerful anecdotes from the source material that really illustrate the profound difference in experiences possible within this industry.
Going from severe exploitation to genuine empowerment.
Exactly that spectrum.
Let's start with Natalia. Her story clearly falls on the side of oppression and deception, and it highlights the failures of the system.
It really does. In 1998, Natalia, a 26-year-old Ukrainian college student, was seeking a husband through an internet matchmaking site called Encounters International, run by a woman named Natasha Spivak.
Okay.
She was matched with a man described to her as a successful, handsome American businessman named James Fox. Sounds good on paper.
Sounds promising, sure.
Natalia and James met in the United States and married just 2 months later. Very quick.
2 months, wow.
But soon after their marriage, the reality of James Fox began to emerge. He started physically abusing her.
Oh no. So what did she do?
Desperate and isolated, she turned to the broker, Natasha Spivak, for help.
And the broker helped her?
Chillingly, no. Spivak told Natalia that all American men were crazy.
What?
And even worse, Spivak threatened Natalia with visa revocation if she didn't remain complacent and stay in the marriage.
The broker threatened her instead of helping her.
Yes. This horrifying response highlights the broker's active role in maintaining Natalia's vulnerability and isolation, making her fear deportation more than the abuse she was enduring. It's a complete betrayal of trust.
That's appalling. Did the abuse continue?
It escalated to a terrifying degree. Natalia was so severely abused while breastfeeding their child that she had to be hospitalized. James was actually charged with attempted murder.
Attempted murder.
Yes. From there, thankfully, she was finally able to escape to a women's shelter where she found some safety and support.
And then?
Once safe, Natalia bravely decided to sue Spivak and Encounters International.
Good for her. What was the outcome?
The court ultimately ruled decisively in Natalia's favor. She was awarded $433,500.
Wow.
The jury found that Spivak had failed to inform Natalia about a critical piece of legislation, the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000, or VTVPA.
What does that act do?
It specifically protects foreign women from deportation if they leave abusive husbands and cooperate with law enforcement, information Natalia desperately needed.
Information the broker actively withheld, even threatened her over.
Exactly. Furthermore, the agency had clearly failed to properly vet James Fox, despite what they had led Natalia to believe about his character and suitability.
Now, here's where Natalia's story reveals an even more disturbing and truly systemic flaw in the larger system. What happened to James Fox?
This is just unbelievable. James's charge of attempted murder was shockingly lowered to simple assault.
From attempted murder to assault.
Yes. He was then mandated to take an anger management course, and upon completion, that assault charge was expunged from his record, wiped clean.
It's sponged, so it's like it never happened legally.
Precisely. And because of this legal loophole and record expungement, James was able to pass a background check.
Oh no, don't tell me.
And chillingly, marry another Russian mail-order bride.
He married someone else through the same system, after nearly killing his first wife.
Yes. It's a horrific, real-world example of how violent men can easily exploit the industry's loopholes and the legal system's failures to obtain new victims, perpetuating a cycle of abuse that is incredibly difficult to break.
That is just sickening. A profound failure of the system to protect vulnerable individuals.
Truly chilling. But in stark contrast to Natalia's horrific experience, we have the story of Lyra Loeb.
Okay, let's hear the other side.
Lyra's story highlights the potential for opportunity and genuine empowerment within the same complex system.
How did her story start?
Lyra, a young woman from Ukraine, grew up in pervasive poverty despite both her parents being doctors, which tells you something about the economic situation there at the time.
Right, even professionals struggled.
Exactly. Even a doctor's salary didn't provide a comfortable or secure life. But Lyra worked incredibly hard academically, even earning a scholarship to study in New York City. She was clearly ambitious and intelligent.
But she couldn't stay.
Unfortunately, her student visa wasn't renewed, forcing her to return to Ukraine. She became deeply depressed, struggling to assimilate back into her old, challenging lifestyle after experiencing life in New York.
That must have been incredibly difficult.
It was, and it was then, with the support of her parents, that she came up with a bold solution. She would become a mail-order bride.
With her parents' support.
Yes. In Ukraine, unlike perhaps the procession in the United States, this was seen by some as an acceptable alternative for impoverished women seeking a better future. It carried less stigma there, apparently.
Interesting. And what's truly remarkable about Lyra's path is the agency she seemed to exercise.
Profound agency. She observed how other women on the matchmaking websites posed seductively to appeal to American men.
But she didn't do that.
No, she explicitly rejected that approach. She took modest, straightforward photos, and crucially in her biography, she explicitly stated that she was looking for an open-minded man who would be supportive of a career-driven woman.
She was clear about her expectations from the start.
Very clear. She deliberately rejected men who were explicitly seeking subservient wives, including one guy who told her he wanted a Ukrainian woman specifically to take care of him in the bedroom. She said no to that. She was setting her own terms.
Good for her. Did her intentionality pay off?
It seems it did. She found Steve, a music producer and art collector from NYC, where she had previously studied. They corresponded for 2 months before he visited Ukraine.
And she felt safe with him.
She reported feeling genuinely safe with him, and she was also truly desperate to get out of the Ukraine and build a new life. She married Steve just 2 days after arriving in NYC.
2 days. Also very fast. How did it turn out?
Her story continued to be one of remarkable empowerment and success, according to her account. She quickly sought jobs, found one as a fashion designer's assistant, building on her creative interests.
She didn't just stay home.
Not at all. She also returned to school to finish her degree. And demonstrating incredible entrepreneurial spirit, she even started a successful blog about the fashion industry, which quickly exploded with approximately 10,000 hits per day.
Wow. From mail-order bride to successful blogger and designer's assistant.
Exactly. Lyra later wrote publicly about her experience, noting that the dangers often highlighted in the U.S. were far less known or discussed in Ukraine. She explicitly stated that she felt empowered.
Empowered by the process.
Empowered, having escaped harsh conditions and becoming a successful career woman entirely on her own terms, using the system to achieve her goals.
These two contrasting stories, Natalia and Lyra, they truly illustrate the vast, often contradictory spectrum of outcomes possible within this industry. It challenges any simplistic understanding.
Absolutely. Oppression and opportunity side by side.
So after hearing these contrasting stories and considering the systemic issues, what does this all mean when we talk about consent? This is where the complexities truly come to light, isn't it? Because it's not as straightforward as it seems in this context.
Not straightforward at all. This raises an incredibly important question for us and for you to consider. What does consent truly mean in the context of mail-order brides?
The common understanding of consent, particularly in the U.S., what does that require?
Well, legally, for consent to be legitimate, there needs to be freedom from violent threats, an individual's competence to make decisions, and sufficient knowledge to provide what's called attitudinal consent.
Attitudinal consent.
Meaning a person has enough information to truly set their own boundaries and agree freely without coercion or deception.
But influential feminist and legal scholar Catherine McKinnon, she offered a profoundly provocative critique of this traditional definition.
She did. In her groundbreaking work, she argued that in societies shaped by economic differences, a lack of political representation for women, and the pervasive physical power men often hold over women, these things inherently hinder women's ability to give true consent.
She argued that systemic inequality itself prevents real consent.
Essentially, yes. Her work suggests that, arguably, all women, not just mail-order brides, cannot give consent in a system that fundamentally perpetuates inequality.
That's a powerful and potentially uncomfortable thought to grapple with. It challenges our very notion of free will within patriarchal structures.
It absolutely does. And even in legal practice, Consent is often ambiguous. It's open for interpretation by attorneys and the judicial system, and often determined on a case-by-case basis.
Which means, unfortunately, that a legal ruling might not always be in the victim's favor, even if they felt coerced.
Exactly. This ambiguity leaves a lot of room for exploitation, as a situation that feels coercive to the individual might not meet the legal threshold for lack of consent.
Radical feminists, for example, have been instrumental in redefining consent in various situations. What's their general stance?
Well, radical feminists, broadly speaking, are revolutionary thinkers who believe that men inherently oppress women, arguing that sexism is the truest form of oppression. Many reject system reform altogether, seeing it as insufficient.
Okay. And are there different views within radical feminism on this?
Oh yes, deep divisions. Radical cultural feminists, for instance, tend to believe that heterosexual relationships are inherently oppressive. They often view activities like pornography and prostitution as fundamentally exploitative.
So from that viewpoint,
Women cannot truly consent to be mail-order brides because they are not treated as equals in society. They argue it leads to relationships that are inherently coercive, regardless of how they might appear on the surface.
but there's another group, radical libertarian feminists.
Right. They offer a contrasting and often provocative view. They argue that activities like pornography and prostitution can actually be empowering for women,
Empowering. How?
seeing it as an exercise of agency, maybe even a form of liberation. As Tong and Botts discuss, this highlights the profound, fundamental divisions within feminist thought itself on the concept of agency and choice, and how it applies to complex situations like mail-order marriages. It's definitely not a monolithic belief system.
Okay, so if we look at the powerless argument for lack of consent,
Mhm.
it really emphasizes the systemic factors.
Hugely. The confluence of global capitalism, entrenched gender hierarchy, and male dominance allows men in economically advanced countries to use their privilege, their money, their status, to exploit women who are in incredibly vulnerable situations.
And most women who become mail-order brides are doing so because they are in dire situations, leaving them at a profound disadvantage before they even begin the process.
They are often rendered powerless, the argument goes. Powerless to their potential husbands, powerless to the American government and its complex laws, powerless to the mail-order bride industry itself.
So the conclusion from this perspective is,
That when you combine all these factors, the economic desperation, the power imbalances, the legal loopholes, the cultural expectations, they fundamentally inhibit the bride's ability to give consent in a truly free and uncoerced way. The very conditions of their lives make genuine, unfettered choice almost an illusion.
however, there's a powerful empowerment counter-argument for consent that challenges this perspective.
There is a very important one to consider.
This viewpoint argues that claiming that all mail-order brides are exploited can be problematic. Why?
Because it can actually be a form of victimization in itself. It suggests that such a claim sabotages equality by implying women cannot take care of themselves and therefore always need protection from men, essentially discrediting their agency and their ability to make choices, however constrained.
So this perspective emphasizes choice and action.
Yes. It suggests that consent is inherently performative. It's an action, a choice made by the individual. If a person chooses to become a mail-order bride, they are performing that action and therefore are consenting.
For some women, then, becoming a mail-order bride is viewed as a genuine expression of agency.
Or even a form of liberation, where they act independently and make an autonomous life decision, often seeing it as their best or perhaps only pathway to a better life.
And there's a cultural relativism argument here, too.
Right. Some argue that we cannot judge other cultures based on our own biases, and women should be able to choose which relationships and life choices are better for them without outside interference or moral condemnation from a different cultural lens. What looks like a bad choice to us might be the best choice available to them.
And the tangible opportunities. They can be incredibly compelling, perhaps making the trade-off seem worthwhile for some women.
Absolutely. Women are offered what is, for them, potentially a much higher standard of living, potentially more women's rights in their new countries than in their home countries.
And the crucial opportunity to send money back to their impoverished families. That can transform their entire family's economic outlook.
Exactly. This influx of money back home can be seen as a way of gaining economic power, allowing women more control over their lives within a patriarchal society, even if that control is gained through marriage.
It's like leveraging the system against itself.
As Denise Brennan noted, becoming a mail-order bride can be seen as an economic strategy that is exploiting and capitalizing on the very system that seeks to exploit them.
So it's often viewed, realistically, as a necessary survival strategy for economic advancement.
And for many, the only opportunity women have for class mobility, a pathway to marrying into a man's social class and privilege, which they could likely never achieve independently in their home countries.
So the picture of consent here, while undeniably fraught with systemic inequalities, it also contains elements of calculated choice, perceived opportunity, and pragmatic survival for those operating under immense pressure and with severely limited alternatives.
It's incredibly layered.
So what does this all mean when we bring it all together? Our deep dive reveals that being a mail-order bride can truly be both oppressive and liberating, often simultaneously. It exists on this complex spectrum, not a simple black and white dichotomy.
Absolutely. The individual stories, the economic drivers, the legal frameworks, they all contribute to this profound duality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the industry is undeniably growing.
At an exponential rate, yes. Fueled by global capitalism and deeply ingrained patriarchal systems. It clearly capitalizes on women's acute economic vulnerability, often leading them to believe they are being saved from dire circumstances rather than participating in what is fundamentally a transactional system.
There's a critical need for accountability here, isn't there?
There is. The author, Wilk, hopes that mail-order bride industries will become legally liable to help women who turn to them when they find themselves in an abusive marriage.
Because, as Natalia's story clearly showed, these companies often offer no assistance or guidance to the brides once they enter the United States. They feel their duties end with, "I do."
Exactly. That simply needs to change. The responsibility needs to extend beyond the initial match, beyond the transaction.
And a huge pervasive problem that inhibits understanding and intervention is the massive data gap you mentioned.
Yes. There is little to no statistical data on the potential spousal abuse, domestic violence, or other harm the mail-order brides may face once they are married and in their new homes. We just don't have reliable numbers on a large scale.
Why is there such a data gap on something so important?
It could be due to numerous interconnected reasons. Many victims fail to come forward due to fear of deportation, shame, isolation.
The industry itself might try to downplay it.
The industry might try to justify abuse or minimize its prevalence by selectively providing statistics on happily married couples. Or governments might genuinely feel they lack jurisdiction over what they perceive as a voluntary contractual arrangement between individuals.
So the author hopes this research brings more awareness.
And crucially, spurs more research and statistical studies from independent bodies. The exponential growth of the industry warrants much more scholarly research to truly understand its full scope, its long-term impact on women, and the societal implications of a multi-billion-dollar market built on international marriage arrangements.
Ultimately, for the author, her research led her back to her aunt.
Yes. It led her to a better understanding of her aunt's situation and why she found comfort and safety in marrying her uncle.
That personal reflection really emphasizes how profound personal circumstances, economic desperation, and cultural conditioning shape individual perceptions of comfort and safety, even in conditions that might seem appalling or at least deeply unequal to an outside observer.
It brings it back to the human level, beyond the statistics and theories.
We've unpacked so much today, from deeply personal anecdotes like the author's aunt to the intricate mechanics of a global industry and the complex legal and philosophical debates around the very meaning of consent. It leaves you wondering.
It really does. This raises an important final question for you, the listener, to consider. In a world still driven by profound economic disparity and deeply ingrained gender hierarchies, what does true, uncoerced consent really look like?
And maybe more importantly,
How do we, as a global society, ensure meaningful protection for individuals who are making life-altering choices under immense, undeniable pressure? What is our collective responsibility to those seeking opportunity in systems that can so easily and so often veer into exploitation?